A cast-iron skillet from Harlem hits a Paris gas flame, the metal singing under heat it had never known. For the first time, this city inhales soul food. The sharp green of collards, the deep amber of rendered fat, the smell that rewires memory. Joe Allen carried that skillet across the Atlantic in 1956, wrapped in cloth the way you protect something that holds your family's hands inside it. His own hands were already mapped with Harlem kitchen workburns, calluses, the muscle memory of 1,000 plates. He was born 2 blocks from 125th Street, where Southern migrants had planted Delta and Low Country kitchens into Northern soil. Collard greens that tasted like grandmother, black-eyed peas that tasted like survival, fried chicken with skin that pulled back golden from the fat that was his childhood. The skillet went in last, wrapped in the same cloth his mother had used to carry it through depression and war. He arrived in Paris carrying more than luggage. He carried lineage. Black American writers, painters, musicians had been arriving in Paris for a decade, finding there what American cities refused to give them. But Allen was not looking for liberation through art. He was looking for a kitchen. The Paris restaurant community recognized what he held before he spoke it into being. They knew he carried something real, something that could not be faked or borrowed or learned from a book. He opened his restaurant, and Paris tasted Harlem for the first time the way it actually tasted in the hands that made it. The food was not exotic. It was direct. It was honest in a way European cuisine had learned not to be. A street where a black man could walk without calculating the risk. That was the gap Allen saw. A table full of brilliant people with nothing from home to eat. Paris. Autumn 1960. He already had an audience. They just did not know it yet. The problem was the ingredients. Paris, in the 1950s, did not stock okra. Black-eyed peas were not on shelves at any market he could find in the first week. He found North African traders at a market called Marché de Ligue in the 12th arrondissement. They had okra. They had dried legumes. What Allen was building in Paris, someone was destroying in Harlem one storefront at a time. Here is where it turns. The supply chain he built was not French. It was diasporic. A Harlem cook sourcing from North African traders to feed West African students in a Pigalle kitchen. No culinary school in Europe had imagined that food map. Allen drew it himself. Pigalle was not the Paris of postcards. It was a working neighborhood. Allen walked those streets and understood something important before he lit the first flame. Inside, he was working the stove alone, his coat still on against the October chill. You knew you were in the right place when you saw the man in the coat at the flame. The 30 seats filled within 2 weeks, then filled again every night after that. James Baldwin came. Other writers in the Expatriate circle came with him. Nearby nightclub performers found him too. Post-performance, they would arrive while still energized. West African students from the University of Paris came in groups on Friday evenings. The room held Harlem and Dakar and Kingston in the same 30 seats. Here is what no archive captured. Who was in that room on any given night? No photographer documented those tables. No journalist filed a dispatch about the food. The Black American expatriate community in Paris had been covered by the French press. Baldwin's work was reviewed. The jazz clubs on Rue des Lombards were photographed repeatedly. Allen's kitchen received none of that attention, not one French food column in those first years. The evidence suggests this was not random. French culinary culture had a hierarchy. At the summit, exquisite formal traditions. Below them, provincial variants struggled for recognition. Lower tier, absent. Non-European cuisines were not categorized as legitimate gastronomy. They remained exotic oddities. Allen kept cooking anyway. Night after night, the coat on, the skillet hot. By 1958, the modest seating capacity proved insufficient. Queues accumulated outside regularly. He had built something that operated entirely outside the French culinary record. Deliberately outside it, he was not chasing recognition. He was feeding people who needed feeding. Your grandmother may have made this same food in a kitchen nobody photographed either. The distinction between what gets called cuisine and what gets called cooking is never just about taste. The food corridor on 125th Street was being erased, replaced by the machinery of urban renewal that never renewed anything for the people who lived there. Urban renewal policies pushed through New York City government in the late 1950s, were clearing blocks. The physical spaces where Alan had learned to cook were being demolished or transformed. He did not know this from Paris. Letters took weeks. News traveled slow. He was building something new in Pigalle, while the source was being erased at home. Two concurrent disappearances, neither documented, neither linked. 1959 brought kitchen expansion. A separate workspace was constructed. Staff increased to 2. The new man, Gerard from Martinique, had never encountered Southern American cooking before he arrived. Gerard learned by watching. No written recipes. Alan cooked from memory, and Gerard memorized the motions. Knowledge transferred through demonstration, not through culinary schools, not through published cookbooks, through proximity and attention. After more than 4 years of operation, the establishment still had no official name. Regulars called it different things. Some called it Joe's. Some called it the Harlem Place. West African students had their own name for it in Wolof, which no French document recorded. The place existed fully in 3 different cultural vocabularies and in none of the official ones. A kitchen that meant something real to hundreds of people, invisible to the city's official record. France was losing its African colonies. 17 nations gained independence in 1960 alone. Populations from West African nations living in Paris confronted circumstances nobody had prepared them for. Some returned home. Others stayed, now citizens of new countries while living in the former empire. The clientele sustaining Alan's kitchen underwent substantial reorganization, but the kitchen did not change. When the political ground moved, the food stayed the same. The skillet stayed hot. People came not just to eat, but to sit in something that did not change, while everything else did. Alan understood this without being told. He had seen it in Harlem too. Food as anchor. Food as the thing that holds when everything else is rearranging. He kept the coat on. He kept the skillet seasoned. He kept the doors open. Sunday, he changed the format. He opened early and ran the meal like a Harlem church dinner. Long tables pushed together. Dishes passed hand to hand. People who did not know each other shared plates. That Sunday format had no precedent in Paris restaurant culture. The French ate at separate tables. What Alan was doing on Sundays was not just feeding people. He was recreating a social structure, collective dining as cultural preservation. This significance never surfaced in French gastronomic discourse. The people who decided what Paris remembered were not in Alan's kitchen. They held the power in editorial offices, culinary institutes, and review columns. And in 1960, every one of those seats was white. French food criticism had a structure. It was not written down as a rule, but it functioned like one. The Michelin Guide had been rating French restaurants since 1900. By 1960, no establishment owned by Black proprietors had earned recognition in its pages. That is not an opinion. That is a count. The Guide Michelin inspectors traveled to restaurants anonymously, selecting which doors to enter. Alan's door in Pigalle was never selected. Not once in those first 4 years. When you erase the places where a culture fed itself, you erase the places where it knew itself. A restaurant, without a review, does not exist in the travel system of a city. Lodging establishments ignored it. Tourist literature excluded it. Only informed patrons discovered him. Alan had built something extraordinary. The city had built a wall around it, made of silence. But something else was happening at the same time, and this is where the wires show. Early in the 1960s, French publications promoted what they termed modern American culinary traditions. The hamburger was coming to Paris. American diners were opening near the Champs-Élysées. French food writers covered this arrival with curiosity, sometimes with alarm. They wrote about American cuisine as though it had just been invented by the ship that carried it. Alan had been cooking contemporary American food in Paris for years, unacknowledged. The food writers were not lying. They were just not looking south of their own assumptions. To 1960 French gastronomy critics, modern American meant exclusively white origin preparations. The hamburger was American. The hot dog was American. Soul food did not enter the category. The erasure was not deliberate. Categorical definitions themselves accomplished it. That is a different kind of erasure, harder to fight because there is no single person to confront. Gerard was watching all of this from the prep area. He learned the food from Allen. He also saw which customers left and never told anyone where they had eaten. The writers, the intellectuals, the visitors who came through on someone else's recommendation. They ate. They said nothing to the press. The meals vanished into silence, as if they'd never been served at all. Allen kept the kitchen running 6 nights a week, as he always had. Now here is a number. Let that number sit with you before moving on. By 2023, fewer than 12 documented accounts of Allen's Pigalle kitchen existed in any language. 12. For a kitchen that fed hundreds of people across more than a decade. Most of those 12 accounts trace back to the same 2 or 3 sources. None of those sources are Allen himself. He left no memoir. No interviews have been found. The man who brought soul food to Paris left almost no paper record of having done it, which means that for most of the last 60 years, he did not exist in the official version of this story. And the silence was not natural. It had a structure. Parisian culinary systems required credentials Allen's background could never satisfy during that era. The system required certified French training. His Harlem experience did not qualify. He could not be reviewed by publications that only reviewed credentialed establishments. He could not be cited by publications that only cited reviewed establishments. Allen could not appear in histories that only saw official restaurants, cited establishments, documented institutions. 3 locked doors, each one pointing back to the first. Each one appearing neutral on its own. No single door said, "Keep Black American cooks out." The architecture did it instead. That is the mechanism. Not one person, not one decision. A structure that produced the same result as a decision would have. That structure persists. Different industry, different city. Same architecture of invisibility. 3 doors that open for some, remain closed for others. He put a name on the door sometime around 1962. Not Joe's, not the Harlem place. Something more formal. The name he chose is not in any French business registry from that period that researchers have found, which means either the registration was filed under a different structure, or it was never filed at all. An entire restaurant, operating in Paris, possibly without a formal business license, for over 6 years. That possibility changes how you understand the silence around it. It was not just ignored. It may have been intentionally informal. A formal registration would have created a paper trail. A paper trail invite inspection. Inspection invite enforcement. In 1960s Paris, a Black American running a kitchen without French culinary credentials faced real risk from health authorities. The evidence suggests Allen understood this calculation. He built the kitchen to survive, not to get famous. Now here is the midpoint of this story. The skillet that left Harlem was the thing that changed how Paris saw itself and how history itself could be served. A French food writer named Androt published an essay in a literary magazine around 1965. The essay covered Chinese food, North African food, American food, and Caribbean food in the city. It was one of the first serious French critical treatments of non-French cooking in a Paris publication. Allen's kitchen was not mentioned. A Pigalle address was listed under Caribbean food, but the name given was wrong. It was the address of a different establishment. Whether Androt had heard of Allen and omitted him, or simply never knew, is unclear. But the effect was identical either way. The first serious French record of this food landscape had a blank where Allen should have been. That blank became the foundation of every subsequent account. Later writers who covered Black American food in Paris cited Androt's essay as a starting point. The soul food restaurants that opened in Europe in the 1980s got reviewed. They had French credentials. They accumulated citations. They created documentary evidence. They appear in historical texts. Some of those writers had encountered Allen's work. Most had not. They inherited the same fractured historical record everyone consulted. The record that left Androt's legacy haunted by its own blank center. Contemporary Paris-based chefs researching African-American culinary contributions start with that same incomplete foundation. They follow the citations. They find the 1970s. They find London. They find New York. The 1956 kitchen, the man in the coat, the Pigalle dress, remain absent from those findings. Not because anyone is careless, because the trail was cut at the point where it should have led to Allen, and rerouted through Androt instead. A 1965 omission by one influential food writer became the foundation for every account that followed. By the early 1970s, the Pigalle kitchen Allen had built was under different management entirely. The 30 seats were still there. The address was the same. But the cross-community supply networks he had personally constructed did not survive the transition. The connections between the Marche d'Alegre traders, the West African students, and the Harlem tradition Allen carried, gone. No institution had ever recognized it. So no institution preserved it when it ended. Gerard and the Friday night students became the sole keepers of genuine memory. The Senegalese student who had paused mid-step on the street, stopped by the smell from Dakar, he remembered. He could not publish in a culinary journal, his knowledge deemed unmarketable. His memory did not count as a citation, but his memory was more accurate than anything Android had written. That is the specific injustice here. Institutions asked other institutions. Journals cited other journals. The circle stayed closed. Allen left Paris sometime in the late 1960s. The exact year is not confirmed. What is confirmed is what he left in that kitchen when he went. The cast iron skillet, the prep table Gerard had worked beside for years. The Sunday format. Gerard kept the kitchen running after Allen was gone. He cooked what he remembered. Memory fades at the edges. Details soften over time. Within 2 years, the food had drifted. Not badly, just away from the source. The collard greens came out slightly different. The seasoning on the fried chicken changed. Only those who had tasted Allen's original cooking would have detected any absence in what came after. That is precisely how a tradition dies without anyone choosing to end it. Slow drift. No single moment of loss. Just distance accumulating. French food writers who had tasted Allen's kitchen, then turned away in silence. Or near it, or heard about it secondhand, were publishing by then. They were writing about the influence of diaspora flavors on European cooking. Not one of those essays named Allen. Not one pointed to Pigalle in the 1950s. They referenced London's scene from the 70s. They referenced New York's from the 80s onward. The timeline they constructed skipped the actual origin by roughly 15 years. Here is the part that takes a moment to absorb. These writers were not concealing anything. Allen's existence had simply never entered their available sources. They cited Android. Android had left a blank. They inherited it and kept writing forward. A generation of culinary historians built their understanding of black food in Europe on a foundation with a hole in it. The hole looked like evidence of absence. It was the absence of evidence. Those are not the same thing. The specific distinction matters, because one implies nothing happened, and the other implies something was missed. His coat was wearing thin by the mid-1960s. He bought a second one, unable to let go of what finally fit. People who found the kitchen in that period remember 2 coats hanging near the stove. His backup and his working one. That detail survived in the memory of people who ate there. No journalist recorded it. In 2019, French culinary historian Sylvie Roux published a study on diaspora food in post-war Paris. Roux accessed community record collections Android never reviewed, including student organization records from Paris universities. Those records included meal logs from African student associations in the early 1960s. They documented his Pigalle kitchen's operations repeatedly, its weekly schedule, its staff, its supply sources. Roux published her findings. The study reached a small academic audience. It has not yet entered the mainstream culinary record. Allen received 2 footnotes in one academic study published 63 years after he opened the kitchen. His skillet weighed about 10 pounds. That is what he put on the ship. 10 pounds of iron wrapped in his mother's cloth. That weight crossed the Atlantic. It fed people for over a decade. It shaped what came after, without ever getting credit. The trail Allen left is faint. It is not gone. The Student Union archives from the University of Paris are still accessible to researchers who know to ask. Sylvie Roux is still working. The cast iron skillet was still in that kitchen when Allen left Paris. What happened to it after is not known. But cast iron does not disappear. It gets passed on, or it gets left behind. It does not dissolve. Somewhere in that city, the weight of it remains. Paris kept eating. The record kept filling in. And the blank where Allen should have been stayed blank. The story of Joe Allen was never an accident of forgetting.